Cruise line private islands have become some of the most visited ports on the planet. There are things about these ports, however, that I bet you don't know. So I'm lifting the veil on tips to make the most of your day and a few secrets I'm betting that you didn't know. Let's dive in. Let's begin with a statistic that you likely had no idea. Cruise line private islands can be among the busiest ports of call on Earth. The list of the busiest cruise ports starts with major departure ports, spots like Miami, Port Canaveral, and Port Everglades. They rank highly with around 4 million passengers each year. Now when it comes to ports of call, Cozumel and Nassau are the busiest, with each one seeing about 3.5 million cruisers each year. Anyone that's visited these ports likely isn't surprised. There can be literally a half dozen ships in port on some days. But Royal Caribbean's CocoCay, the best example of a private island that's become a stop on seemingly every one of the cruise line's trips in the area, it's up there as well. In a recent earnings call, the cruise line said it expects 2.5 million passengers in 2023 to visit and 3 million in 2024. In other words, these aren't just a nice stop, they are a major component of cruise itineraries. Do you want to find your own little spot on a private island? If you're the type that wants some more space after being on the cruise ship, then the best advice is to start walking. Similar to how a parking lot is most crowded by the front door of a store, the beaches, they seem to be most crowded closest to the ship. I mean, if you're right at the ship, then they can simply get packed. But if you just walk a little farther, then you'll find dramatically fewer people. On some of the largest islands, like MSC's Ocean Key, that walk can be a considerable distance, although there are some shuttles that will take you there. But the farther that you go, the smaller that the crowds will be. It's not always the case, but in general, private destinations, they can save you a lot of money on things like the drink packages and the Wi-Fi packages. Now, when you buy these things, they are bought for the entire cruise, but you can normally only use them when you are on the ship. So if you are in a traditional port of call one day, the drink package, for instance, it's useless until you get back aboard. That's not usually the case at private destinations. You can think of these as extensions of the cruise ship. The drink package will often, though not always, have full use in port just like you have on the ship. So you can hit the bar and order without paying extra. It's a similar thing for Wi-Fi, which allows you to stay in touch even at the beach. So if you've never visited one of these private destinations, you might be wondering about food. The good thing is that food is usually included in your stay there for the day. There's usually a large buffet area for passengers to eat, and then some other spots dotted around so you don't always have to walk so far just to get a snack. Thankfully, for-charge restaurants are pretty rare in private destinations, although there are a few. Of course, you can always just go back to the ship to eat if you want. Despite being in port, restaurants on board the ship, they're still open, giving you more options to dine. Do you have mobility issues, or let's face it, you just don't want to walk in the heat and the humidity of the Caribbean? Don't worry, you are covered. Most of these private spots, they have transportation services that circle around to ferry passengers from one spot to the other. They are free to ride, just wait at the stop and then hop on when they arrive. They may not be the fastest way around, as usually it's just quicker to walk, but if you don't want to do that, then know that there are still ways of getting around. There can be a lot to see and do in a private island or destination. A spot like Royal Caribbean's CocoCay has things everywhere, from the pool to multiple beaches, restaurants, the beach club, the water park, and a whole lot more. If you're unprepared, it frankly can be a little bit overwhelming. You may not know where to go. Just like if you were going to go visit a theme park, it makes things much easier if you are familiar with the lay of the land before you start walking aimlessly. Islands have maps available, usually somewhere right near where you enter, and sometimes even on the ship before you get off. They are also available online. Now, it's a good idea to take just a minute or two and check out the map and figure out where things are in relation to one another. That way, you aren't just wandering around wasting time. What does the private destination have in common with the pool deck on the ship? They seem to follow similar crowd patterns. Head down early in the morning and there's practically no one around. But as the day goes on, the crowds build, seeming to peak around lunchtime or maybe a little bit after. In fact, some islands can feel downright crowded at this time, depending on how many people are on the island and what size of ships are in port. As the afternoon wears on, however, many people they seem to call it a day relatively early, then head back to the ship, despite still having plenty of time, daylight, and sunshine to enjoy. If there's a spot that you want to be or an activity that you want to do on the island, I would suggest doing it earlier in the morning or later in the afternoon when the crowds can die down significantly. In that similar vein of early in the morning or late in the afternoon, perhaps the best tip for visiting a private island is to turn one day into 2 days. Here's how. Usually, your cruise, it will dock early in the morning and start letting passengers off around, say, 8 a.m. or so. All aboard, though, it isn't until about 5 p.m. With some lines like MSC, they offer extended or even overnight stays at their private destination. What's smart is to split that day into 2. So you head down earlier, it doesn't have to be right at 8 a.m., but you enjoy the morning and some lunch on land. Then after lunch, and when things are the most crowded, you head back to the ship and you have yourself a little siesta. You get out of the sun for a little bit, you take a nap if you want, and you just take it easy. Then you can head back out a couple of hours later and still have plenty of sun and time to enjoy the island again, this time feeling rejuvenated. Otherwise, being in the sun all day, it can be a beating. Now make no mistake that you can spend plenty of money at the private destinations. Between the water parks and the cabanas and the shore excursions, there's plenty of opportunity to spend. But one tip is to use this as a free day if possible. When it comes to ports of call, there is no spot easier to have an inexpensive day than the private islands. Depending on the spot, you'll have beaches, a pool, and food all included for you. It's the other ports where you usually have to spend something if you want to do anything. Even getting around most ports involves cab fare, and you have to pay for anything that you want to eat, and many beaches aren't near as nice or relaxing as what's offered by the cruise line. So, save your money on these days and put it toward excursions in other ports of call, as you can still have a lot of fun in the cruise line's island without spending a fortune. Now on the cruise ship, it might feel like you have the complete run of the place, but there are areas that you will never ever see. A private destination is the same way. Sometimes you can see these areas from the ship, or they are readily visible from Google Maps, but the back of house areas can be massive. This is where the crew members stay, where the maintenance areas are housed to keep the destination in top shape, and those other back of house spots. If you're on an island, you'll also notice that there are major undeveloped parts that you simply don't have access to go see. So if you're thinking that there are deserted beach spots where you can go, yeah, that is not going to happen. One tip you won't often hear about when visiting private destinations: take advantage of the ship on these days. These ports are extremely popular since they are custom built for cruise passengers. As a result, the ship, it empties out during the day. If there's something that you've wanted to do on board but you haven't had the chance to do it yet, this is a great time to do it. For instance, you should find more availability in the spa or the specialty restaurants for lunch and shorter lines for activities on board, though you should check to make sure that they are open before you plan your day around them. Now, this doesn't mean that you don't go out and enjoy the destination, but you simply carve out some time to do what you want to do on the ship before or after you venture into port. So if you've noticed that a lot of cruises seem to visit the cruise line's private spots, it is not your imagination. Cruise lines love to feature these private destinations for multiple reasons. First is control. In the private destinations, cruise lines love that they can have complete control and tailor the experience to what passengers will like so that they have a more enjoyable cruise overall. Second, with a captive audience, these destinations can offer all sorts of amenities and extras. And instead of you spending that money in an independent port of call, you're now spending it with the cruise line. For instance, Royal Caribbean, they charge up to nearly $4,000 for some of their cabanas, upwards of $160 or more for entrance to the water park, and nearly $300 to an exclusive beach club on the island. Finally, if you'll notice, many of the destinations they are in the Bahamas, only between 60 to 100 miles from Miami and other Florida ports of call. This isn't by accident, it's strategic. The close location means considerable savings in fuel and lower emissions from the ship. Just like taking a road trip to a spot a couple hours away instead of across the country saves gas, cruising to a location that's nearby can add up to millions and millions of dollars in saved fuel costs over the course of a year. Thank you for watching, and hopefully you picked up a thing or two about visiting private destinations. Now for more, check out the description of this video below. I've put some links to Cruzely.com where I have guides, tips, things to know about specific private islands. As well, be sure to like and subscribe, and until next time, happy sailing.